and welcome to today's webinar, Is There Calm After the Storm? The updated QM's user manual and 10.1 change follow-up presented by QRM. My name is Amy and I'll be your moderator for this session. Before we dive in, I'd like to share a bit about QRM. We're an in-house rehab management company that works with skilled nursing facilities across the country. We specialize in a wide range of services, including MDF education and training, medical review, compliance assistance, and marketing services. Visit qrmhealth.com to discover more about QRM and our services. Now I would like to introduce you to our two wonderful presenters who will be sharing their expertise with you today. We have Megan Ussery, Director of Reimbursement Programming for QRM. With over 15 years of experience, Megan is dedicated to post-acute care with a particular focus on reimbursement and quality. Her expertise lies in utilizing MDS data trends and outcomes to guide process development and education for clients throughout the country. Next, we have Stacy Grandel, Director of Reimbursement for QRM. Stacy has more than 19 years of experience in long-term care and is recognized for her expertise in the RAI process, audits, appeals, clinical processes, and clinical reimbursement. Stacy has served on the APACN Expert Advisory Panel since August of 2019 and has been instrumental in continuing innovation and quality in the long-term care industry. And I apologize, Stacy, that's Director of Reimbursement Operations. I left operations up.
That's quite
so
all right.
Without further ado, I just want to thank everyone again for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the webinar and find it informative and engaging. Now I'll hand it over to Stacy.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you so much. So Megan and I are really excited to be here today. It's kind of weird because we had been doing almost weekly webinars, and then during the month of October, everybody was so focused on working through all the glitches and all the changes that it really was quiet. So we're excited to be able to gather here again today to talk about some of the things that has occurred and some of the things to focus on and to kind of just bring us back. So today, go ahead and advance to the next slide. We're going to talk about updates. We're going to revisit some of the major updates, some that facilities have been struggling with, and some that just need a little bit more attention. As we go over these updates, if you are thinking to yourself that you need a refresher, or maybe there are some of these things that you're like, I had no idea that was happening, you can visit our website at qrmhealth.com and click on the events page. And then if you click on view past webinars, all of our past webinars are recorded and available for you to review on our page. So please go and do that, utilize that, especially if you feel like you just need a refresher on these. We're not going to go into great detail on all of the updates, but we're just going to talk about a few that really have, really, I think, deserve their own little conversation. We're going to talk about the quality measures and the changes that have occurred. We're going to talk about the freeze, and then we'll end the day. So you can see there's not a ton on our agenda for today, but we really want to kind of talk about how to get back to those basics to make sure that we're doing the things that we need to really help us focus on what we need to be focused on. So we're going to first start out with talking about the updates. Go to the next slide, Zach. And the next slide. So these are the things we're going to talk about in regards to the updates. So these are what I like to call our big ticket items. And this is what we're going to focus on today. We know that there have been several more items. There's a lot of other things that have been causing headaches and causing extra work at the facility level, but we're really just going to focus on these few things for today. These will give us plenty to talk about. Go ahead onto the next slide. And Megan, I'm gonna have you talk about the section O. The section O, it was and wasn't and was and wasn't. So let's talk about that.
And I feel like we could probably all just form a support group for all of the the trauma that we experience and all these changes. So there were a lot of moving parts with section O. I mean, changes galore. We saw parts of Section O removed, namely those like therapy days and minutes and respiratory and psych, on any of those item sets that either weren't a 5-day or weren't combined with a 5-day. Then in late October, got another errata document and another updated MDS 3.0 item set version. And that removed the completion language that stated that those items were only to be completed when A0310B was a 01. So that basically what happened here is this errata document ensured that section O0400 is completed on not just those 5 days, but also those comprehensive item sets and the quarterly assessments as well. So there were also just quite a few issues with transmission of assessments and getting them accepted into the database because of this issue. So if you're still experiencing rejections that are specific to Section O items, I would definitely recommend that you reach out to your software vendor, because at this point, everything should be flowing pretty smoothly. Go on to the next one, Zach. All right, so why was this such a big deal? Why was everybody freaking out about the therapy days and minutes being removed from Section O? Well, because therapy still matters, right? There are several items on the MDS that aren't payment drivers anymore. So we really need to be focused on outcomes. We have that new discharge function score quality measure, and we'll talk about that in a little bit later on in the presentation, but therapy is also still a driver for states that are using a RUGS-based Medicaid payment system. And on top of that, we'll continue to see patients with a need for skilled rehab. So it's important to be able to track those therapy items in Section O. So let's focus on patient needs, whether it be for short-term skilled patients or long-term patients. How are we using therapy to improve a patient's quality of life, and how are we measuring their success? We know CMS is really watching these outcomes like a hawk, that those function-related quality measures impact not only federal programs, but also state level programs. They impact that public facing report card and a facility's financial success. But of course, it all starts with the care. Go to the next one. Stacy, let's talk to us about the glitches.
Oh, the glitches. I think Facebook almost blew up because of all of the conversations on these software glitches. Every single facility across the entire country was impacted by these software glitches. And it wasn't specific to one vendor because of what was causing the glitches. It wasn't specific to one single vendor. So everybody was impacted by these. There were several glitches identified and corrected, but there are still some that keep popping up their heads. And I would honestly anticipate, as providers are billing for dates of service in October, there are going to be some other glitches and issues that are identified. So it's really important that you're paying attention and being aware. CMS did release a document recognizing that there were 21 known issues in the RAI version, the RAI manual version 1.18.11, and that these issues are what caused the EMR errors. So these glitches exposed a lot of holes in our triple check processes, right? Because a lot of facilities, it was messing up our HIPS codes, and a lot of facilities didn't even notice, they didn't even recognize. So it really, during these types of situations, it exposes where our weak points are at our facility. And so that's not necessarily a bad thing, because then it allowed us to reconvene and say, okay, we clearly have some process issues. Let's get those in check. Like I said, the EMR was producing incorrect HIPS codes. So this is obviously a very concerning error, especially if your MDS nurse or your biller or business office manager, whoever, doesn't know how to calculate the HIPS codes, didn't know what the HIPS code should have even been. They've always just depended on their software to calculate that for them. It posed a problem because then they were billing incorrect HIPS codes. So questions to ask yourself: do you know what the appropriate HIPS code should be? Do you know how to calculate that? Or do you have a tool that can help you calculate that outside of your EMR? Because the PDPM calculation really didn't change, right? So you should be able to calculate that PDPM score and know what your HIPS code should be for billing. So if you're one of those people who doesn't understand how the PDPM calculation work, or you don't have a calculator, maybe it's time to look at what tools are out there so that you know what it should be and not just rely on that software to calculate it. Other questions to ask yourself is, do you have a triple check process at your facility? And are you truly going through that triple check process? A lot of times what I see at facilities is they have a triple check process, but it's really just going through and checking these boxes on a piece of paper and sending it to their corporate office saying, yes, we had triple check. So really looking, are you truly having triple check? Are you saying, this is the HIPS code that we got? This is the HIPS code that it was supposed to be. Do they match? Yes. Is that what's on the bill? Yes. Okay. That's just one small portion of triple check, but really taking a hard look at that process. You really need to make sure that you dedicate extra time for October and even November triple check, really looking at those PDPM scores, making sure things are populating to your claims the way that they should be. There were some other glitches that came up as well. The HIPS wasn't the only glitches. As you all know, there were several, incorrect skip patterns, inability to submit MDSs. So we do expect that there will be more clarification that does come later. Next, we have the PHQ. I'm just going to call it the PHQ from now on instead of the PHQ 9 or the PHQ 2 to 9, because it's a tongue twister, right? It's a tongue twister to say PHQ 2 to 9. Plus, there's lots of states that are still requiring the full PHQ 9 to be done on the OSA. So let's talk about this for a second. We knew that this was happening. So a lot of us trained, prepared, did everything that we could, but we are still seeing fewer residents triggering for that PDPM depression rate. So a couple of things you want to ask yourself. Who is conducting the interviews at your facility? Do they know how important this is, not only for reimbursement, but for appropriate treatment of the resident? When is the last time that that person read the instructions for PHQ directly from the REI manual? If when I ask that question, you don't know, I would strongly encourage you, maybe as a team or as an assignment to whoever's doing those PHQ interviews, to go and read the instructions in the REI manual. I cannot tell you how many facilities I've been in that, they'll have somebody, maybe it's their social worker, maybe it's the speech language pathologist, doing these interviews, and they've done them for so many years that they think they're doing it the right way. But because they've been doing it so long, they've kind of strayed from the actual instruction. So I would strongly encourage you, I would challenge you guys to go in and actually read the directions in the REI manual. How are you supposed to be conducting that? The other thing that you have available to you in the REI manual, besides just your basic rules for conducting this, is in Appendix D, there is some good tips and tricks for interviewing residents. So making sure that the resident has a quiet, private, comfortable environment, that they can hear you, they can understand you, making them feel that they have time to answer those questions honestly. A lot of times we're in such a rush that we just run into the resident's room. We say, hey, we have a few questions to ask you. You're asking them. They know, they can feel that you're in a rush. So they're just going to say whatever they can to get you out of the room as fast as possible, right? Because they don't want to upset you. So really taking that time, helping them, get into a comfortable place where it's private and they can answer honestly what is really going on, especially where we have the PHQ-2 now, where those first two questions are so crucial. It's important that we provide the right environment because these are pretty personal questions. These aren't just asking them what their favorite color is. These are personal questions. And if they don't know you, if they don't feel comfortable, they're not going to give you honest answers, right? Which could really negatively impact the care that we are providing to them. You can also have the items written down or typed so that it's printed in large, clear print. So as you're going over the item responses with them, they can see them and they can point to those. Because sometimes it's so overwhelming when you're giving them so many options, they forget what they were or they weren't paying attention or whatever it may be. If you have them printed and give them, either a card or something that they can look at, that's going to help them be able to give the honest responses as well. And then don't forget about those interviewing techniques that they talk about in the REI manual as well. Your unfolding, your disentangling, your echoing. Those are important techniques to use so that you can get honest and true answers. We're only going for accuracy. We're not trying to increase the depression rate in our facilities, but we need to know honestly what's going on so that we can then provide the appropriate care. And remember, with your OSAs, they're going to require the full PHQ 9, not just the 2. Okay. I would really strongly have whoever's doing these go and review the REI manual instructions, review that Appendix D, because I can almost guarantee it's been a while since that person has read it, if at all. The next thing we're going to talk about is the move from Section G to Section GG. So the current MDS no longer has Section G. This is our new item set. It no longer has Section G. Section G has been a part of the MDF item set forever, right? And we knew with Section G, our aides were documenting that, however, whether it was flow sheets or in our EMR, and we knew that it took ongoing training, right? I can't tell you how many times I had facilities tell me, our aides are never getting it right. They're never documenting it, no matter how many times I train, okay? With the move to Section GG, it's not going to be any different. So you have to have that expectation that it's going to require that continuous training and education, no matter who's doing the documentation, whether it's your aides, your therapy staff, your nursing, it's going to require that continuous education. GG has been around since 2016, right? But our aides really haven't had exposure to it. And maybe even our nurses haven't had exposure to it because we were still focused on Section G because that's what was driving a lot of things at that time. So although it's been around since 2016, it is it's a new scale, it's new definitions. So it really is going to require a lot of training and observation. And even after you feel like you've got it down, it's going to continue to require that training. Once you think you've trained enough, train again, train again. I don't think we give our aides enough credit that they can learn these GG items. I've had several people tell me, oh no, my aides could never do that. I'm not going to have my aides document the Section GG items. I would give them the opportunity. They can do it, especially if we're providing that training, that education, and that mentoring. I think you'll be surprised at what they're able to do. I know that I'm oversimplifying this because it does take a lot of work. And the items in GG, they are very similar to the items that were in Section G, right? So bed mobility, it's still there in Section GG. It's just broken out. So now we have, rolling left to right, sit to lying to sitting on the side of the bed. Those are all part of bed mobility. One strategy that you could use is a Section GG champion. When I say Section GG champion, most of you are thinking, what, you have one person that does all of the GG for everyone in your facility? That's not what it means. It means you have one person that's in charge of coordinating the documentation review, making sure that the documentation is getting done, and then compiling it so that as an IDT, we can then review and determine what that usual function is. It should not just be the aides documenting or the nurses documenting or therapy documenting, but it really should be a collaborative effort. That's where you're going to get that resident's true usual performance. All right, next slide.
Great points, Stacy. Great points. All right, we're going to talk about my favorite topic, quality measures.
Yay!
Woohoo! All right. So where do quality measures appear? My answer is everywhere. No, but really, the first place that we typically think of when we're talking about quality measures is Care Compare and 5-star. In this system, we see short and long stay measures that are used in, that calculation where, we're able to go on Care Compare, we're able to see, um, different nursing homes and how they rate against each other in a variety of things, but mainly quality measures. Then we have survey. Yep, survey. So QMs are used to identify patients to be included in that survey sample before surveyors come on site. They're always watching. Surveyors are always watching, I feel like. Then we have SNF Quality Reporting Program, or the QRP, which requires submission of data pertaining to QMs as outlined in that Impact Act. That quality measure data is then made publicly available also on Care Compare. Then we have value-based purchasing, or the VBP program, another acronym. And this program awards incentive payments to SNFs to encourage them to improve their quality of care that they provide to the patients. And then finally, we have, depending on what state you're in, there are pay for performance programs at that state level. Many states choose to have additional programs that use quality measure data to award those top performing providers with additional monies.
So huge, right? Huge impact. So
They're
many
everywhere.
things. QMs are literally everywhere.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that makes quality measure so confusing, right? Because there is, we have like just a quality, like a bank, a pool of quality measures. But then each of those programs that we just mentioned, CMS decides which ones they're going to use for which program. So it's kind of like a customized program, for each of those, where they can just pull whatever quality measures they want. And as we're seeing now, a lot of these programs are expanding. We're getting overlap of quality measures. There are several that are in the 5-star program that now are also in the QRP and the VBP, and we'll get to all of that here in just a second. But here's just a quick look at the Care Compare website. So you go to medicare.gov, you can find the Care Compare website. If you've never seen it, that's your homework for today. You can just Google Care Compare, go, straight to that website. Look at just what's around you, really, because on this site, the public can search any location, view those nearby nursing facilities, compare them against each other in survey outcomes, staffing ratios, and of course, quality measures. It really is that public facing report card for each provider. So it's super important that, we're focusing on providing really good care, ensuring that those MDSs are correct. If we do those things right, the positive outcomes will follow, and that will be reflected, on this website. All right, so both the SNF QRP and VBP programs are expanding, and that means that there are financial implications for not providing that elevated level of quality care. So for the SNF QRP, that data completeness threshold is increasing to 90%, which is up from 80%. And that's for submissions beginning January 1st, this upcoming year, 2024. Failure to submit the required data elements could result in that 2 percentage point reduction in the SNF's annual payment update. So I think we've all heard, don't dash, don't dash, don't dash. And in a prior webinar, we had a screenshot of that table and just how many data elements there are now, which is, it's insane. I can't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but there are so many more items on the MDS now that will impact your threshold percentage if you dash them. And we'll talk a little bit more about the QRP in a minute. But that VBP program, in a nutshell, CMS withholds 2% of all SNFs Medicare fee-for-service payments, or Part A payments, in order to fund this program. And then 60% of that 2% is redistributed back to SNFs as incentive payments. So you're essentially with VBP, you're essentially trying to earn back as much of that 2% that was withheld if you can. So let's dig a little bit further into the QRP measure. So this is an overview. What you're seeing on your screen is an overview of the SNF quality reporting program measures that are currently adopted for fiscal year 2024. However, these are changing. So there are 3 measures that are removed from the program, and data collection on these 3 ended October 1st of this year. And those are the application of percent of long-term care patients with admission and discharge functional assessment and care plan that addresses function. I think that one wins the award for the longest QM description. And then we've also got the change in self-care score and the change in mobility score. So as of October 1st of 2023, they're no longer collecting data on those. We also began data collection on some new measures on October 1st that impact the fiscal year 2025 annual payment update. And those are that discharge function score. We've talked a lot about that. Also, the transfer of health information to the provider, transfer of health information to the patient. So those are those 2 new items in the new MDS item set. And these will continue on with the SNF QRP and data collection for the fiscal year 2026 annual payment update that starts January 1st of 2024. And I know that when we talk about fiscal years and calendar years and program years and data collection, it gets really confusing. So I want you to think about it like this. For the SNF QRP, what CMS is collecting now will impact your facility payments in 2 years. All right. That one little single factor makes it, I think, easy for folks to kind of kick the can down the road, as they say. But I want you to treat this program like an investment. So no, you're not going to see an immediate rewards, and in a time where we all want instant gratification for everything. That's hard. But we really need to be focusing on really great quality care and good outcomes for our patients. And if we're consistent in doing that, the future annual payment updates will reflect all that hard work. All right, so next we're going to take a look at the VBP measures. But before we do that, I want to explain something. There are so many terms that are used in all these different programs, and they get a little bit confusing. So for the VBP, there's a baseline period, a performance period, and a program year. So that baseline period for these measures has already occurred, and depending on what measure it was, it happened anywhere from October of 2021 to September of 2023. So that's that baseline period. What happens here? They collect the baseline data, and then during the performance period, CMS essentially compares the SNF's performance against that associated baseline period. So we have that initial data collection period, then your performance period. They're comparing that data to what you had during the baseline. Then they calculate that achievement and improvement score, and then assign a performance score. Then CMS calculates an incentive payment and adjusts that federal per diem rate for services provided during that program year. So there's kind of 3 timeframes to look at: the baseline, the performance, and then how you compared on both of those determines your incentive multiplier. Then that starts paying during the program year. So most of these measures that you see on your screen should look familiar to you because they're used, like I said earlier, in many different reporting programs. So on October 1st, we began the initial performance period for 3 QMs adopted in the 2023 final rule, and then 1 measure adopted in the 2024 final rule. Those 2023 measures are that SNF HAI, so the healthcare associated infections that require hospitalization, the total nurse staffing hours per resident day, DC to community post-acute care measure for SNFs, and then that 2020, the one that was adopted for fiscal year 2024, is that total nursing staff turnover. So now that data is being collected for 5 total measures in the VBP, because we're still including that 30-day all-cause readmission measure, which up until this point, that was it. That was the one Lone Ranger QM for the VBP program. But now we've got these additional ones. So these will begin impacting payment in fiscal year 2026, with the exception of that DC to community measure, which will be a year after that. So on October 1st of next year, VBP is going to expand again. So that will be the first performance period for an additional 3 measures and 1 replacement measure. So everything we've already talked about, plus a couple more. So we've got the falls with major injury, that long stay measure that I think everybody's familiar with. We've got the discharge function score. We've also got hospitalizations per 1,000 long stay resident days. And then in addition to that, we've got the SNF within stay potentially preventable readmissions measure. So lots of quality measures in this program, and they're kind of stair-stepping their way up. We're going from 1 to 5 to 8. And it's quite a bit to digest. The key here is don't overcomplicate it. We really just need to be focusing on the measures, not really necessarily worried about what program year it's going to start paying in, or what's the performance period. If we're doing the things right on a day-to-day basis and taking care of these patients and making sure that our MDSs are coded accurately, all of this stuff will fall in line.
I like that, Megan. And for me, I always just called the value-based purchasing, that was our rehospitalization measure, right? Because that was the only one. And now there's so many more. We can't call it that anymore.
No, I know.
So it makes it more complex. But I want to emphasize what you said, Megan. It's so important that we're not getting caught up in all of these different terminology that they're using, performance years and program years and baseline year and whatever else, but instead we're focusing on that care that we're providing, right?
Right. And soon all of the quality measures will impact all of the programs. So it's like you just throw your hands up in the air and say, all right, we're just going to focus on the measures themselves, not necessarily what they impact. And start with the basics. I think you're exactly right.
Right. I love that. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the updated quality measure user manual. So there are a couple of manuals that whenever I'm training a new MDS nurse, I say, hey, these are things that you need to download and be aware of and know how to search them. One of them obviously is the RAI manual. That's important for an MDS nurse to have, to be able to understand, referring to that on a daily basis. No matter how long you've been an MDS nurse, you're referring to that quite often. But then one of the others is the MDS 3.0 quality measure user manual. And that's where it outlines each of those quality measures and how they're calculated. And that's important, not because the MDS nurse is in charge of quality measures, but because it's important for an MDS nurse to understand the trigger rules, right? Because an MDS nurse is typically the only person in the facility that can understand that MDS jargon, right? It's like we speak a completely different language. So it's important for you to understand how they trigger so that as we're providing care, there is some strategy to setting ARDs, which is totally appropriate per the RAI manual, to help us make sure that we are truly taking credit for the things that we're doing in our facility. Another one, you do have a QRP manual, you have a value-based purchase manual. There's a manual or a technical guide to everything. But what we're going to focus on now is these new measures or new rules that are going to be impacting our facilities. So with the removal of Section G, they had to change the way some QMs were calculated. They had no choice, right? That just came with it. If you remove those items that are helping calculate a quality measure, you have to come up with a new way to calculate those. So Megan's going to talk more about these a little bit later, but I kind of want to just put them in your brain. So the quality measures that were impacted most by the removal of G was like your percent of residents who made improvements in function, which is a short stay measure. Also, the residents whose help for ADLs increased, the residents whose ability to move independently worsened, your high risk resident with pressure ulcers, and then your low risk residents who lost control of their bowel or bladder. Okay, so those are the major quality measures, and we'll talk a lot more about that. But the purpose of this was because that Section GG allows that comparison of function across all of those post-acute care settings. So those ADL and mobility measures, because Section G was removed, they had to replace them with Section GG. And they also used that time to make other adjustments that they needed as well. One thing that I thought was interesting in the MDS 3.0 user manual is the quality in that manual, they still use the term late loss ADLs. So they're still using the term late loss ADLs, but they're no longer coming from Section G, they're coming from Section GG. So you have your sit to lying, you have your sit to stand. So your sit to lying, that would be equivalent in my brain. I like to think that's equivalent to like your bed mobility. Then you have your sit to stand, which would be equivalent to your transfers. And then your eating, obviously equivalent to eating. And then your toilet transfers equivalent to your toileting. So you still have those, and the manual still calls them the late loss ADL. So you still have those 4 late loss ADLs. And that's what they're using now to determine your triggers for these specific quality measures. In states where you're using the OSA for Medicaid rate calculations, Section G information is still being collected because they need that information to calculate those RUG scores from your RUGs for and before RUG calculations. So what all does moving from Section G to Section GG impact? How does that impact your day-to-day life? So the scales are inverted. So if you have staff that's used to, saying, oh, a 3 means extensive services, now we have to reteach them that a 3 means partial or moderate assist and what that definition means. So is there going to be a learning curve? Is this going to be a lot of work up front? Yes, it most definitely will be, because we can't stay using the Section G terminology because that's no longer what we're using to code our MDS, right? And as the MDS nurse, you now are using usual performance instead of the rule of 3. Right. So that's a huge mind shift as well. We've all had that rule of 3 drilled into our heads for years, and now we're having to use usual performance. So what does usual performance mean? Do you, as the MDS nurse, know what usual performance is? Do you know how to determine that based on the documentation that occurred during that assessment window? Some G items did move over from Section GG unchanged, and some of them changed as they moved from Section G to GG, and some of them they just got completely rid of. So some of the items that moved from Section G to GG, like your functional limitation in range of motion, your mobility devices, your tub or shower transfer, personal hygiene, those all moved over to Section GG. Those were items that CMS still felt like were important. So the major impact that it's going to have on your day-to-day life is really changing and shifting that mindset and learning those new definitions and having your facility teams learn those definitions. And you can do this in a really fun way. You can play games, you can do contests, put signs with the definitions up all over, whatever you need to really get them used to these new definitions. But it does pose a challenge for those states who are still using the OSA, because you still have to document for those 4 late loss ADLs that are coded in Section G for those OSA items. So 4 of the 15 quality measures used in the nursing home 5-star rating system are affected by these MDS changes. So I'm going to have Megan really dive deep into these quality measures so that you understand the impact of these changes.
Yeah. So which 4 were affected? There's 1 short stay, and that is the percent of residents who made improvements in function. Zach, you can go to the next slide. And then 3 long stay measures that were affected, and those were the percent of residents whose ability to move independently worsened, percent of residents who need help, whose need for help, with ADLs increased, and then the percent of high risk residents with pressure ulcers. And so, those first 3 that I mentioned are function related. So those kind of make sense. But the reason why they had to kind of pivot on the high risk residents with pressure ulcers is because we had Section G items that were used to determine whether a patient was high risk or not. So we're going to kind of look next at what the plans were or are for these measures moving forward. And the plan is that they freeze. It's been a while since we've
Surprise,
had a
surprise.
CMS freeze anything. And I can't help but always think about Batman and Mr. Freeze when we talk about quality measures and them being frozen. I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm dorky. Who knows? But so first, let's talk about what is a freeze, right? So when CMS says they're going to freeze quality measures that are used in the 5-star rating system, it just means that they're going to hold them constant. So this occurs each time they need time to accommodate changes within the MDS, like the removal of Section G. So we've got those 4 that I mentioned that will be frozen beginning in April of 2024. And then that short stay functionality measure will actually be replaced in October of 2024 with that discharge function score measure. And then those remaining 3 measures, those long stay measures, will just continue to be frozen until January 2025 while CMS collects the data for those equivalent measures. All right, so the first of those 4 measures that we mentioned is the percentage of residents whose ability to move independently worsened. So this measure will become residents whose ability to walk independently worsened. And we'll use the ability to walk 10 feet item that's at GG 01701. Again, this measure will be frozen beginning with that April 2024 refresh on Care Compare, and will resume with the January 2025 refresh using that GG data. All right, next we have the percent of residents whose need for help with ADLs increased, and this measure was respecified to use Section GG data, those 4 late loss ADLs that Stacy mentioned. So we've got sit to lying, sit to stand, eating, and toilet transfers. And again, same story here. It'll be frozen April of 2024, and then we'll resume with that new GG data in January of 2025.
So, Megan, really quickly, can you explain why it won't be frozen until April?
Yeah, so we've still got data coming in that we can use to calculate the quality measures for the 5-star. So, their look back period, I guess, if you want to call it, still has enough Section G data for them to collect and report on up until April. Then beginning in April, they won't have that Section G data anymore, and we'll have to switch to that GG.
Very good.
All right. So on October 1st, like I mentioned, we also saw a change with that long stay pressure ulcer measure. The percent of high risk residents with pressure ulcers was replaced with just percent of residents with pressure ulcers, and that high risk verbiage was removed. So now we're simply looking at those long stay patients who have a stage 2, 3, or 4 or unstageable pressure ulcer, instead of having that high risk criteria that, that measure is just going to be risk adjusted using other MDS items as covariates. So, we don't have that bed mobility item anymore, which is one of the things that factored into qualifying a patient as high risk. So instead of that high risk criteria, they're just going to risk adjust the measure using other MDS items as those covariates.
And I think that's huge because we've had that stratification for so long, placing them into that high risk category, and now it's just going to adjust a little bit. I don't think we'll see as much adjustments there.
I would certainly agree. All right, so that 4th and final measure to be frozen was that short stay improvements in function measure. This measure used self-performance of prior to, it used the self-performance of 3 Section G items on the MDS. So we were looking at transfers, locomotion on the unit, and walking in the corridor. And then the October 1 changes to the MDS required a replacement of that old measure. Now we'll be using the discharge function score measure. So this new measure uses Section GG items that are listed here. And as you can tell, there are quite a few more items needed to calculate it, 11 to be exact, versus 3. So it will be crucial to get the coding on these assessments accurate. So if you're still struggling with Section GG, now is the time to really focus on getting it right. We really have to get it right. This discharge function score is going to be used across several programs. It's not going to go away anytime soon. So we really need to make sure that we're getting that coding right from admission to discharge, and all of the other MDS items that go into that measure to get that expected outcome score that CMS is looking for. All right, Stacy, how do we calm the storm?
Oh, I don't know if there's one simple answer to that. You want to go into the next slide, Zach, and we'll talk about a couple of things. So we all know that chaos breeds chaos, right? What do they teach you in any emergency situation, Megan?
Stay calm.
Stay calm. Stay calm. That's the number one thing. And that's just how we have to be now, is we have to remain calm. And so how we can do that is to shift our focus, right? Making sure that our focus is really on resident care. That is what comes first. And Megan talked a lot about that. Like, there's so many details and so many complications on how to calculate and how to do all of these things. And so it's really important that we're focusing on patient care and not so focused on the technical things. Now, I say that, but it's important for you to know what measures they're looking at. But resident care comes first. Okay. So part of that resident care, believe it or not, is documentation. I could spend all day talking about the importance of documentation for resident care, not even discussing the financial impact of documentation, but documentation is important for the resident's care. It allows that continuity of care. If we don't know what has already been done for a resident, how do we know we're not repeating the care? Or how do we know that something doesn't work for a resident if we're not documenting what we've done, right? So how can we show all of the hard work that we've done, all of the processes that we've tried in the past for this resident and that aren't working or that worked? That's how documentation is really so important. So it's that resident care and then accurately documenting the care that we're providing. And then that will allow us to accurately code the MDSs, right? So that documentation has to be clear and direct, and it has to be able to provide the next caregiver an understanding of how the resident is, what's going on with the resident, what are our next steps to help them reach their full potential or improve their quality of life. And it's important that we're not working in silos. I know that we've talked about this several times, and I cannot overemphasize how important it is that we are working as an IDT, that we're getting everybody's input and that we're having that communication so that we're providing the best care that we can and we're documenting that care that we're providing. So part of this is performing those rounds, making sure that we're actually having eyes on the resident, making sure that we understand what's truly going on and that those residents' needs are being met. Like Megan said, if we're focusing on the resident care and documenting that care we're providing, then our quality measures are going to take care of themselves. Okay. So teach, train, observe. That's what we should be doing in our facilities with our resident and with our staff. Training is never going to end. If you think it's a one and done, you're in for a rude awakening. You've always got to keep in mind we're going to need to continue to train. And I think if you have that mindset, it's going to go a lot smoother, right? Because you're setting your expectations, saying, okay, this is what I know is going to happen. I know that my aides are going to need weekly training on documentation for Section GG. That's just a fact. So how can I work those into my day-to-day tasks so that it's not an extra burden, but it's just part of my job? It's something that we have to do in order to get the accurate documentation for the care that they are providing.
Yeah, and to speak to that, Stacy, I think that's great. If we're just telling ourselves this is a weekly thing, and an idea there is have a one GG item be a spotlight for that week.
Yeah.
How many times have we gone to the REI manual and you maybe somebody asks you a question and you go and you're digging around trying to find an answer, an example or something. You come across something else and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't think I'd ever read that before.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's just so many nuances. If we're doing some sort of like GG spotlight or, with our nursing staff and our CNAs and just, covering one bite at a time, I think I think we'll be surprised at how digestible that is for them, and how it sticks rather than saying, all right, we're going to sit down, we're going to do GG documentation training and we're going through every item. That's probably not gonna be very beneficial or meaningful. So that's just an idea. Just an
Yeah.
idea.
I love that idea, Megan. I think that's a very good idea. We just want to end with a quote on the next slide. It says, "Storms draw something out of us that calm seas don't." And when I had to read this quite a few times to really get it and really be able to apply it to myself. And what I thought of is just like with the COVID pandemic, we saw abilities and capabilities of ourselves and others that were hidden before because we were in calm seas, right? And that I think I view this all of these glitches and all these changes the same way. The storms and the glitches and the hard times really helped us identify broken processes or holes or ways that we could improve the things that were happening in our facilities, maybe even the care that we were providing. It's that newfound understanding and knowledge that really helps us progress and become better. If we're just staying stagnant, we really don't grow and become better. So although it's very difficult and it's hard to go through, these changes have really helped us. I've seen some amazing ideas from different facilities of ways that they can do things that we really didn't think of before, but being in these situations has really brought out really good things. The next slide just has our references on it. And then, like Amy said, please submit all of your questions and we will gather those together and send out a document with the answers to all of those questions. You can go ahead to the next couple slides. We do, again, I know Amy mentioned it, but I just want to mention again that we do offer MDS oversight services with QRM. Those are listed on the slide. If it's something that you might be interested in, please feel free to reach out. And that ends our discussion for today. I'm going to flip it back over to Amy.
Well, thank you, both Stacy and Megan. Fantastic job again. This was a great session, and I'm sure everybody would agree with me. So, of course, you can reach out if a question comes to mind after the fact, after we've ended this session. You can email mds@qrmhealth.com. But until we meet again, we hope you have a great day. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.